At my cousin's wedding, I heard my aunt say, "Don't let her kid near the cake, she'll beg for leftovers." My daughter heard it too. She looked down. She didn't cry, she just walked away. And what she did next? Nobody saw that coming, not even me. That's how it started. In a room filled with white roses, polished silverware, and crystal chandeliers, one sentence sliced through everything like glass, breaking at a quiet dinner. I stood frozen by the drink station, a plastic cup in my hand while my heart cracked open inside my chest. I wasn't the one they were talking about, not directly anyway, but they might as well have said it to my face. My daughter Lena had just turned 10. She'd been excited about this wedding for weeks. She helped me iron her simple cotton dress the night before. She picked out her own shoes, flats that were slightly too big but sparkled when she walked. She even asked me if we should bring something. We didn't have much, but I bake when I'm nervous. So I made a small chocolate cake at home the morning of the wedding. Lena helped frost it and added pink sprinkles we had saved from her own birthday last year. It was our gift to the bride, my cousin Kiara. Nothing fancy, but from the heart. We weren't even on the original guest list. I got a message 2 days before the wedding from Kiara. It said, "If you guys are free, feel free to stop by. It's nothing formal, but you're welcome." Which is code, in my family, for we didn't really plan for you, but if you show up, I guess we can't stop you. Still, I didn't want Lena to feel that. So I curled my hair, dusted off my old purse, and said, "Let's go celebrate love." That's what I told her. But now, standing near the dessert table, pretending to read the label on a fruit punch jug, I could feel every cell in my body screaming to protect my daughter. I heard the voice, clear, low, and just mocking enough to echo. It was my Aunt Rochelle. "Don't let her kid near the cake. She'll beg for leftovers." Lena was only a few steps away when she said it. She'd been reaching for a napkin, smiling politely at the lady slicing the main wedding cake. The moment she heard those words, her hand froze mid-air. Her eyes dropped. Her shoulders curled just slightly in. That's how I knew she heard. She didn't cry. She didn't even look at me. She just turned, walked back toward me slowly, and whispered, "I'm not hungry anymore." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Aunt Rochelle's wine glass and throw it across the room. I wanted to walk out right then and never look back. But Lena was watching me, and she needed more than a scene. She needed strength. So I crouched down next to her and said, "You didn't do anything wrong, you hear me?" She nodded, but she didn't look up. I held her close and told myself, just make it through the next hour. Smile, pretend, keep her safe. That's what I'd always done at these things. Slip in, stay invisible, leave quietly. But then something changed. Lena pulled back from me slightly and said, "Can I hold the cake for a while?" I looked down. She was serious, focused. "Of course," I said, handing her the small pink box with our homemade cake inside. "Why?" She didn't answer. She just stood up, adjusted the glitter strap on her dress, and began walking, past the chairs, past the tables, past the dessert table, and straight toward the DJ booth. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. She was heading toward the mic. She was 10 years old, and she was about to speak. I didn't know what she was going to say. I didn't know what she was going to do. But I knew one thing for sure. No one in that room was ready for what my daughter was about to deliver. Not even me. Before the microphone, before the whispers, before that moment everyone remembers, let me take you back to where it all started, before we even walked into that hall. It was a warm Saturday morning, and my daughter Lena was sitting on the floor with a plastic tub of sprinkles in her lap, focused like a surgeon as she carefully decorated a cake we had made together. It was chocolate, her favorite. She'd helped me stir the batter, pour it into a pan, and mix the pink buttercream frosting until her arms ached. We only had one cake box left from her last birthday, so we used that and cleaned it up with wipes to make it look brand new. This was our gift. Not expensive, not store-bought, not on theme, but it was made with love. And in our home, that has always been enough. My name's Amara. I'm a single mom. I've been raising Lena on my own since she was 2. Her father left after our marriage, crumbled under pressure. Neither of us was mature enough to handle. Since then, it's been me and her against the world. Some days we barely scrape by. Some weeks I've made dinner out of canned beans and rice and called it a special recipe just to keep her smiling. But we're a team, and she's my heart. Lena's the kind of kid who notices things. Not just the obvious things. She notices when I'm tired even if I don't say it. She notices when someone's voice sounds too sharp or too soft. She's observant, thoughtful, and far too familiar with the feeling of being talked about when people think you're not listening. We were invited to the wedding 2 days before it happened. Not a formal invitation, just a text from my cousin Kiara that said, "We'd love to have you both if you're free." I appreciated the gesture, even though I knew what it meant. We weren't expected, but our absence might be noticed if we didn't show. Still, Lena was excited. A wedding? With cake and music and dancing? I didn't have the heart to dampen her joy. So we made a plan. I altered a dress she had outgrown slightly, added ribbon at the waist, some lace at the hem. We found a pair of flats at a thrift store. I curled her hair that morning, something I hadn't done in years, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she beamed. "Do I look like a wedding guest?" "You look like the reason they're lucky to have one," I said. I wore a simple black dress I've had since before Lena was born. Cleaned it, pressed it, paired it with earrings I hadn't worn since my own wedding day. There's something both beautiful and heartbreaking about preparing to show up for a family that's never quite shown up for you. We arrived at the venue, this white-columned hall with massive glass doors and manicured lawns. I already felt out of place before we even stepped inside. Most of the cars in the parking lot looked like they belonged to someone with a bonus check in a corner office. I was driving my cousin's borrowed sedan with a dent in the door. Inside, it was elegant. White roses, candles floating in tall vases, gold-trimmed plates. It looked like something out of a bridal magazine. Kiara looked beautiful, radiant in her dress, all smiles, her hair in a perfect updo. She hugged us when she saw us, thanked us for coming, and didn't even ask about the cake box Lena carried. No one did. I noticed the glances almost immediately. The way certain relatives gave us tight smiles but didn't come close. The way Aunt Rochelle's gaze swept over Lena's shoes and lingered just a second too long. I felt the judgment press in around us like humidity. But Lena smiled through it. She asked to sit near the back so we wouldn't block anyone's view. She held the cake box on her lap and asked me if she could give it to Kiara after dinner. That's the kind of child she is. Kind, thoughtful, always trying not to take up too much space in rooms where people have already decided she doesn't belong. I looked around at the polished tables, the servers carrying champagne flutes, the perfect little macarons on display near the dessert table. And even then, before the moment that would change everything, I felt it. This tension in the air, like we were standing in a place that had already made up its mind about us. What I didn't know then was that Lena had already made up her mind too. She just hadn't told me yet. The reception hall smelled like vanilla and roses, and the music had just shifted from soft strings to a mellow R&B playlist. Plates were being cleared. The laughter was rising, along with the volume of the wine-poured conversations. I was doing what I always do at family events, blending in just enough to avoid being noticed, but never enough to belong. Lena and I sat near the back where the folding chairs didn't match the rest of the setup. It was clear that the closer tables had been saved for immediate family and VIPs. We didn't complain. Lena was happily sipping her juice box and watching the dance floor come to life. She still had the cake box in her lap, balancing it like it was a glass sculpture. I leaned over and asked her if she wanted to put it down. She shook her head. "Not yet, it's not time." That girl, always waiting for the right moment, always trying to do things the right way, even when the world doesn't offer her the same courtesy. We were sitting quietly, enjoying what we could of the moment, when it happened. A group of older women had gathered near the dessert table. I could hear their heels clicking on the floor, their laughter sharp, just on the edge of cruel. That's where Aunt Rochelle was holding court, glass of white wine in hand, voice just loud enough to carry, and then she said it. "Don't let her kid near the cake, she'll beg for leftovers." I turned my head so fast I felt something in my neck pinch. Lena was just a few feet away from them. She had walked over to grab a napkin. She heard it. Every word. I saw her flinch like someone had tapped her shoulder with a cold hand. Her fingers paused, mid-reach. Her shoulders dropped. Then she turned around and walked back to me. She didn't say anything. She didn't cry. But she didn't have to. I saw it all on her face. That look. The one I've worn more times than I can count. Or the one where you swallow something so bitter and hope no one sees it burning your throat on the way down? I'm not hungry anymore, she whispered, sitting beside me. I stared at her. Her hands were still gently holding the cake box, but her grip was tighter now, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. And me. I froze. Part of me wanted to stand up, march over to Rochelle, and say, "How dare you speak about my child like that? Do you know what she's been through? Do you know what we've given up just to be here today?" But I didn't. Because in that moment, I wasn't just a mother, I was a girl again. The girl who grew up being dismissed by this very family, the one they said was too quiet and too sensitive, too plain. I knew the cost of speaking up in rooms like that. It's not that they shout you down, it's that they erase you, with polite smiles, with passive-aggressive toasts, with pictures where your face never makes it into the frame, so I sat there, still. Rage trapped in my chest, regret already bubbling. I reached out and took Lena's hand. "You didn't do anything wrong," I told her softly. She nodded, but she didn't look at me. I wanted to take her home. I wanted to get far away from white cakes and white lies. But then she said, very quietly, "Can I hold the mic later?" I looked at her, confused. "Why?" She shrugged. "I want to say something nice to Kiara." I paused, because even though her words were kind, there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before, something older, something sharper. I nodded. "If they let you." She nodded back, calm, focused, and then she sat up a little straighter in her chair. That moment, the one where she didn't cry, didn't shrink, didn't break, was when I realized the people in this room could talk all they wanted, but my daughter was about to speak louder, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with truth, and they wouldn't be ready for it. The speeches were about to start. People began drifting from the bar to their tables, drinks in hand, eyes scanning the front of the hall where the mic stood waiting near the DJ booth. The bridal party was seated on a raised platform, and the DJ adjusted the microphone like he was preparing for a political debate. A few relatives took their seats, pulling out folded index cards and clearing their throats. My cousin Marcus was first, charming, funny, said all the right things. Everyone clapped. Then one of Kiara's college friends followed with a joke-filled toast that got polite laughs. The energy in the room was light, polished, safe, but I couldn't focus on any of it. My eyes kept drifting back to Lena. She hadn't said much since we sat down, just held the cake box on her lap like it was something sacred. Her shoes dangled off her chair, not quite touching the ground. Her chin rested on one hand as she watched the speakers with a gaze that felt deeper than her years. Then, without a word, she stood up. I reached for her instinctively. "Lena, wait." She looked at me calmly. "You said we brought the cake with love, right?" I nodded. "Then I want to tell them." My stomach flipped. "Tell who?" She glanced toward the mic. "Everyone." I felt like time stopped for a second. The background noise blurred. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. "You don't have to say anything," I whispered. "I know," she said, "but I want to." Before I could respond, she turned and began walking. Across the floor, past the tables, cake box held tightly in both hands like a gift she hadn't gotten the chance to give yet. The room didn't notice her right away. She was small, quiet, 10 years old. She moved like a shadow in the glow of chandeliers. But when she reached the DJ booth and gently tapped his elbow, people started paying attention. He bent down. She said something I couldn't hear. He looked over at me. I must have had my heart on my face, because he hesitated, then slowly handed her the mic. And just like that, my daughter stood in front of over 100 people, alone. The room hushed. I couldn't breathe. Lena looked around, her face serious but calm. She held the mic with both hands. "Hi, I'm Lena." Her voice was soft but clear. A few chuckles in the crowd, nervous ones, curious ones. "I know I'm not part of the bridal party or anything. I just wanted to say something real quick." She glanced down at the cake box. "My mom and I made a cake for Kiara. We didn't know what kind she liked, so we just made our favorite. Chocolate with pink frosting. We brought it because my mom said weddings are about giving what you can, even if it's not much." The room was silent now. Forks stopped clinking. No phones were out. Some people here think we don't belong, or that I shouldn't be near the big cake because we'd probably beg for leftovers. My throat tightened. All the air in the room shifted. People were holding their breath. Lena's voice didn't shake. "But I don't need your cake." She held up the pink box slightly. "We brought our own." "Want a slice of truth?" Someone near the front gasped. A quiet laugh broke out from one of the cousins. But no one was mocking her. She wasn't trying to be clever. She was telling the truth. "My mom works really hard, and she teaches me to show up with love, not shame. We didn't come here to impress anyone. We came because family is supposed to mean something." She paused. "So if anyone wants a piece of our cake, we'll be at our table." She handed the mic back to the DJ and walked back toward me like nothing had happened. And still, no one said a word. Not a single person in that sparkling, white-decorated wedding hall was prepared for what a 10-year-old girl had just done. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't point fingers. She didn't need to. She told the truth, and the truth stood taller than anyone in that room. And as she sat back down next to me, gently placing the cake box on the table, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe in a long time. We weren't invisible. Not anymore. When Lena sat back down beside me, the pink cake box resting on the table like it was the centerpiece, she didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The room had gone still in that strange, surreal way, like after a lightning strike. Nobody quite knew how to react. You could feel it. Eyes darting around, necks craning to see other people's expressions, waiting for someone to break the silence. And then it happened. A single clap. From the front of the room, near the head table, Kiara, the bride, stood up. Her hands came together slowly, deliberately. Clap, clap, clap. She wasn't smiling at first. She looked like she was processing everything, like Lena's words had landed somewhere deep and were still echoing around inside her. Then she smiled, and her hands kept clapping. Others began to follow, soft at first, unsure, then louder, and then all at once. It wasn't a standing ovation, it wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Applause for a girl who had just spoken more truth in 2 minutes than most people had the courage to say in their entire lives. I looked at Lena. She was quiet, her gaze down on her lap like she wasn't sure what she'd done, like it hadn't quite hit her yet that she'd just shifted the entire mood of the room. Kiara walked toward us, past her bridal party, past the staring guests, past her own mother, who looked frozen in place. She reached our table, then knelt beside Lena and whispered something I couldn't hear. Lena nodded. Kiara stood up, turned to the crowd, and said, "I didn't know about the other cake, but I know now, and I want some." That earned a few chuckles, the kind that come not from humor, but from release, from tension breaking. I opened the box. It wasn't anything fancy. The frosting had smudged a little during the ride, and the sprinkles were uneven, but it was ours, honest, handmade, paid for with time and care, not status or performance. Kiara picked up the plastic knife and made the first slice. She took a bite right there, in her wedding dress, standing over a folding table in the back of the hall. Then she smiled again, bigger this time. "Best cake here." That was when people really started to move. A few cousins came by to ask if they could try a piece. One of the groomsmen took a slice back to his table and came back for seconds. Someone asked if we had used almond extract. Lena explained the frosting recipe like she was on a cooking show, proud and detailed and unbothered. The DJ, sensing the energy shift, played something upbeat. Light returned to the room, but it was different now. Before, the celebration had felt carefully curated, like a show. Now it felt human. And then, across the room, Aunt Rochelle stood up, wine in hand, mouth set, eyes narrow. For a second, I braced myself. I thought she was going to say something sharp, cut through the softness like she always did. But she didn't. She just turned and walked out of the hall without a word. No one followed her. No one even really looked after her. Her power, the power of whispers and petty cruelty, had dissolved in the wake of a 10-year-old girl's truth. As the evening wore on, people danced, talked, shared stories. But here's what stuck with me most. Everywhere Lena went, people smiled. Not fake, not patronizing, real smiles. Respectful ones. She wasn't the kid who might beg for cake anymore. She was the girl who told the truth and gave everyone something better to remember. And me? For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was surviving a family event. I felt like I belonged in the room. Not because anyone gave me permission, but because my daughter took up space with grace and clarity, and in doing so, made room for me too. What started as a whisper, meant to humiliate, ended with a voice that inspired. It wasn't loud, it wasn't rehearsed, it was Lena, it was truth, and it was enough to change everything. The wedding ended late. The music slowed, candles burned down, and chairs sat empty in the quiet buzz of a celebration winding down. But for me and Lena, the night had already reached its peak long before the final song. We didn't stay until the very end. Kiara hugged us again before we left, holding Lena's hand and saying, "You're brave. Thank you." She looked at me after that and added, "You too." That meant more than she probably realized. We walked out into the parking lot with the now empty cake box tucked under Lena's arm, still smelling faintly of cocoa and frosting. The air was cooler than when we arrived. The stars were out, and it felt like the world had exhaled. Lena was quiet on the way home, not upset, just thoughtful. I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She wasn't just the same girl who had walked into that wedding hours earlier. She was sitting straighter, calmer. Something had shifted in her. She finally spoke as we neared our apartment. "Was it okay? What I said?" I pulled the car over for a moment. I looked at her, not just her eyes, but the way her fingers traced the edge of the cake box, the way she waited for my answer like it mattered more than anything else. "Lena," I said, "what you did was one of the bravest things I've ever seen." She smiled softly. I didn't want to be mean. "You weren't," I said. "You were honest. And sometimes honesty feels louder than shouting, especially to people who've been ignoring it for too long." That conversation stuck with me, because what she really wanted to know wasn't if she embarrassed me or disrupted the event. She wanted to know if she was still allowed to be good, even after telling the truth. She's been taught, like many of us, that to be quiet is to be polite, and to speak up is to invite conflict. But that night, she redefined strength. Not by yelling, not by blaming, but by refusing to disappear. And that changed me too. I've spent most of my life making myself small to survive, in family rooms, at holiday dinners, at weddings like that one. I learned to walk softly, speak less, let the louder people fill the space. I thought that was grace. I thought that was maturity. But now I see it for what it really was, fear dressed up as composure. Watching my daughter speak with such calm and clarity forced me to ask myself something uncomfortable. Why hadn't I? Why did it take a 10-year-old to say what I've carried in my chest for years? The answer hit me hard, because I was raised in a family where silence was rewarded and shame was dressed up as tradition. You don't question Aunt Rochelle. You don't make a scene. You don't tell the truth if it makes people uncomfortable. You smile. You serve cake. You stay grateful you were invited. But that night proved something different. That truth isn't rude. That honesty isn't drama. And that taking up space, especially when people want you small, isn't arrogance. It's dignity. Since the wedding, the shifts have been small, but real. Kiara texted us the next day, asking for the cake recipe. I sent her a photo of the handwritten card Lena and I had used to bake it. She posted it on her Instagram with a caption that read, "The best part of the wedding came from the heart, literally." Rochelle hasn't reached out. I don't expect her to, and that's okay. I'm done chasing approval in places that thrive on my absence. Lena still talks about that night like it wasn't a big deal. "It was just a little cake," she says. But I know better. It wasn't just a cake. It was a statement. It was a message to every kid who's ever been side-eyed for wearing last season's shoes, to every mom who's ever brought a homemade gift into a room full of catered elegance, to every person who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. You don't need a fancy invite to speak the truth. You don't need their cake to bring your own. And sometimes, what you bring will be what they remember most. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever stood in the back of a room wondering if you were enough, let me remind you, you were never the problem. And sometimes all it takes is one small voice to remind the whole room what really matters. Sometimes it takes the smallest voice to say the biggest truth. That night wasn't just about a wedding. It was about dignity, courage, and choosing not to stay silent when it matters most. If this story touched something in you, If you've ever been made to feel small or watch someone you love rise above judgment with quiet strength, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their worth, like if it moved you, even a little. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real, raw, and honest stories that speak to the heart. Thank you for watching. Stay brave, stay kind, and always bring your own truth to the table.